everyone, I'm super excited for this new book video where I'm going to talk about the two series written by Stephanie Garber called Caraval and Once Upon a Broken Heart. The purpose of this video is just to talk about the books, tell you my opinion, my thoughts, but also give you more information on the series, tell you if there is a specific order that you need to follow, and just like if one series is more worth it than another. So yeah, let's dive in and start with the genre of these books. So both series are romantasy, but for some reason, Once Upon a Broken Heart is more marketed as fairy tale vibe, whereas Caraval is not really marketed in a specific like subgenre, but it gives more like night circus, magical vibes. And it was actually funny because after finishing the two series, I realized that it's the same genre. Both give this like fairy tale vibes. Once Upon a Broken Heart doesn't give more fairy tale vibes than Caraval. So if you're wondering which series you're going to like, they're pretty much the same in terms of genre. So answering the question if you should read Caraval before Once Upon a Broken Heart, the answer is yes, because for example, Jax is the main character in Once Upon a Broken Heart, and all of his background information is in Caraval from book 2. Why? Because he's one of the main characters there and he's part of the love triangle. And so what happened, for example, to me, I started reading Once Upon a Broken Heart first. Why? Because so many people said, oh, you don't need to read Caraval before, it's irrelevant, blah, blah, blah. And also just the whole vibes, but Once Upon a Broken Heart were giving, like the fairy tale vibes as it's marketed. I was more attracted by that than the like magical circus kind of games that you have in Caraval. And so I remember reading Once Upon a Broken Heart and I was so confused. It just felt like I was part of a group of friends, but I was a new person. And so oftentimes they have a conversation and I just miss out because they're talking about things that happened to them before they met me. And I'm like, wait, but I don't get it. And that's how you feel when you're reading Once Upon a Broken Heart, because so many information will just be left out as if you're supposed to know it, because you're supposed to read Caraval first. And so I remember finishing the book and just feeling dissatisfied. I just was left really confused, like in a fog. And that's when I decided to put that series on a pause and read Caraval first. And everything started to make sense. When I saw that Jax is literally the main character in Legendary, so book 2 of the Caraval series, I was like, well, here you go. Here's the answer to my questions that I had during the whole time I was reading Once Upon a Broken Heart. And for example, my twin sister, she immediately started with Caraval and then Once Upon a Broken Heart. And she told me like, I don't know how you did it. Like, how could you read Once Upon a Broken Heart without reading Caraval? Because it just doesn't make any sense if you do that. And that's how it is. I know that some people still enjoyed this series, even though they haven't read Caraval, but I think you'll just miss these like small moments on why Evangeline, for example, is jealous whenever she thinks about Jack's relationship with Donatella. You'll just miss the small moments. Also, for example, why Jax is upset about his previous relationships. And one big answer to the question like about Jack's existence is in Caraval. So it's up to you in terms of which series you want to read, but if you fully want to enjoy Once Upon a Broken Heart, I highly suggest reading Caraval first. And as I said, after reading the two series, both of them give the same fairy tale vibes. Like, I think Caraval is giving even more fairy tale vibes because, to be honest, I would say that Once Upon a Broken Heart gives more vampire vibes than fairy tale. But I'll talk about it a bit more. So, when I said about vampires, it's because in both series there is an element that's really present, it's blood. You couldn't really tell that in the Caraval series. Yes, blood was present, like you had some blood spells and like blood could save someone. But in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, you actually do have vampires, and basically magical blood can do magical things. So I was surprised because I'm not a huge fan of vampire books. That's not my cup of tea, but I really like the way here it was described. So if you're into vampires, I think you'll really enjoy the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, where it's even more developed than in Caraval. Now about the characters. The characters are so similar in both series. So for example, in Caraval, the first book, the main character is Scarlet, and she's more reserved, cautious, not really adventurous, and quite naive because she wants her happy ending and she wants to escape that toxic place she has at home with her dad, and she wants to escape with her sister Donatella. And so she thinks that her safe option is basically a guy that she has never met but only written letters. And she wants to marry him because she thinks that's the safe choice. I remember reading that and I was like, I don't know how safe it is. Donatella is a bit different because she's the opposite of Scarlet. She's way more daring, adventurous, in a way also selfish, because sometimes the decision she's taking is without any consideration towards Scarlet. I remember, I think it was in book 3, where there was a situation where Scarlet told Donatella like, hey, there's a really important thing that I need to do, for example, at 5 p.m. You have to come home by that time because I'll leave. And Donatella was like, yeah, sure, but then she was late for 1 or 2 days. And for once, Scarlet left and did her thing. And I was like, oh, thank God. Because for the previous 2 books, Scarlet was kind of like a wallflower in terms of Donatella. Like, she would do anything for Donatella. But at the same time, I felt like Donatella was really overstepping these boundaries. And in a sense, being really selfish towards her sister, Scarlet. So I would say Scarlet, in a sense, is way more naive than Donatella. But one thing that Donatella had is that she really wanted her love interest to change for her. Like, she wanted him to change his values, his pretty much essence. And she was upset when he didn't say yes immediately to change who he is. She was kind of like, oh, that means that you don't love me. But then at the same time, she didn't want to change for him. So I was like, that's an interesting relationship. And then Evangeline in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series is pretty much a mix of the two. She's even more naive than Scarlet. I remember reading the first book and I was face palming myself every 5 seconds because it was quite embarrassing, the things she was thinking or doing. And she's really similar to Scarlet in this sense that she just met the guy, like first time meeting him, and she thinks that that's her happy ending. And I was like, girl, like, you just met him. I mean, it's a bit better than Scarlet, who never met the guy and was like, oh, that's my safe choice. But here I was like girls, like, get a grip. And it's funny because both Scarlet and Evangeline had an attraction to someone else, but both of them were like, oh no, but he's not a safe choice, I shouldn't feel that, and really trying to basically not acknowledging their emotions. And so for me, like, reading Once Upon a Broken Heart felt like reading Scarlet's story 2.0, basically, because she was so similar, like Evangeline was so similar to Scarlet. Then how is Evangeline similar to Donatella? Is that she's not as selfish as Donatella, not gonna lie, but she's really hot-headed. Like, she would do stuff without really thinking, and she has that adventurous side that Donatella has. Both of them, what's similar in terms of romance and like when it comes to guys, is that they want the guy to change for them. They want the guy to change their essence. I think it's in a sort of way they want to prove to people that, see, he loves me so much that he's ready to change for me, which for me was kind of like, I didn't know how to feel about that, because I just don't think that you love the person enough if you want them to change for you. So I was a bit on the fence. Uh, but then I felt like the guys were way more diverse in terms of personality, in terms of character. It was really, I had a blast reading about them. Jax is by far my favorite character of both series. Scarlet is up there. I think she's still a great character. Donatella, I didn't like her so much because I couldn't really relate to her, but she's the perfect character for fantasy books. She's like daring, she's adventurous, so I can see people liking her a lot. But yeah, I feel like there was more diversity in terms of the guys. Now, let's talk about the overall plot and like writing style. So, the writing style in Caraval and Once Upon a Broken Heart is so different. Caraval, the way Stephanie described things, it was for taste. Like, she would describe the sky being like, oh, it's so blue and tastes like cotton candy. And in the beginning, I was a bit surprised. I was like, oh, I don't know how to feel about that. But the more I was reading, the more it was giving that Alice in Wonderland vibe. Like, it was super magical and mystical. And then when I finished the series and started rereading, well, the first book of the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, I've noticed that her description style completely changed. It was the usual description style that you can see in books, just like, colors. If there is a need to describe the smell, she would describe the smell. But you kind of didn't have a description for taste. And I really missed that for some reason. I just thought that the Caraval descriptions were way more unique, and that's why I gave that fairy tale vibe to the series. And we kind of lost that in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. I think maybe you had a few descriptions like that in book 2 or book 3, but it was pretty much non-existent. And as I said, I really liked the description for taste because it was so unique in Caraval, but that's also one of the reasons why people didn't like it. They felt that uh, Once Upon a Broken Heart description were just better and just made more sense. So to each their own. I personally thought that the Caraval writing style was better, more intriguing, more unique. I really like the plot overall in Caraval. In book 1, I remember the ending left me a bit unsure of how I felt about the book, because before that, I loved it. You had so many plot twists. It was honestly amazing. But the ending, when it touched upon the theme of death, I don't know how I felt about that, because it was just, I don't know, weirdly described. But then in book 2, they explained that theme a bit better and like what happened at the end of book 1. So I was left satisfied. The book 2 was really smooth in terms of plot. Everything made sense. Book 3, there was a thing that kind of left me, like, I was happy with Scarlet's secret because you learned something huge about Scarlet in book 3. But then at the same time, thinking about it, I was like, wait, but we didn't get any hints in book 1, book 2 that she has this secret. So when this secret was revealed in book 3, I was like, wait, that kind of feels out, like it's coming out of nowhere. So I don't know, even though book 3 was my favorite book, because we get both perspective from Donatella and Scarlet, you still had this moment with Scarlet's secret that didn't make a lot of sense, I would say. But still, it was a phenomenal series. I think I gave all the books 5 stars, so I really enjoyed it. I felt like it was just so unique. It's really unlike all the books I have read. Like, as I said, the description style was the main reason why it felt so unique. So in terms of the plot, in Once Upon a Broken Heart, it was a roller coaster, because I remember in book 1 the main thing that bothered me was Evangeline, who is the main character. She was just too naive, too trusting, and I don't know, I wish she had a character development, and I could feel that it would happen in book 2. That's one of the reasons why I kept reading this series, because I just hoped that she would get better, because Jax is an amazing, excellent character. He is the perfect definition of morally great character. But yeah, Evangeline was not my favorite. And then book 2, the first 100 pages were super repetitive. It felt like I was back in book 1. So I remember feeling a bit upset, because I was like, why am I kind of rereading the same thing? But after that, the book got so good. The plot was plotting, the schemes were scheming. I was just loving it. The romance part was exquisite. We got so many Evangeline and Jack's moment. It was amazing. And then I was generally thinking of giving the book 5 stars. And that's when, at the end, we got hit. Like, it can be spoilers, so you can skip. But we got hit with an amnesia trope. And I don't mind amnesia tropes if they're in the beginning, because that means that you won't really get any repetition, because you're learning about what the character forgot. Here I was like, oh my gosh, we got hit with that the last 5 pages of the second book. That means that book 3, the final book, will get a lot of repetition, and I was super scared about how this is going to go. Plus I was like, well, what is going to happen to our romance part, because it's kind of like it was a reset to 0 basically. And I was like, yeah, but still, maybe it will be good, maybe book 3 will be good. I was reading on my Kindle, so I could see the percentage. 67% of the book was flashbacks and repetition from Evangeline's side. And it felt kind of like a little bit off, because not only we had this repetition, but also we got Evangeline's point of view, Apollo's point of view, and Jack's point of view. I think we had 5 chapters. He is the main character, and we barely had his point of views. He was in the 67% of the book, he was not present, pretty much, which means we didn't get any romance, and it's a romantic book, so you know, it doesn't really make sense. For example, with Caraval, as I said, the first book was from Scarlett's perspective, then second book, Donatella's perspective, third book, it was a combination of both, which I felt like it was coming together. The book 3 in Once Upon a Broken Heart didn't make sense, because the first 2 books, it's only from Evangeline's perspective. So why are we getting 3 perspective in the final book? But you know, I'm not also complaining, because even though it disrupted, I feel like, the flow of the book, at least we were getting Apollo's perspective as much as Evangeline's, and his perspective was way more interesting because it was something new. Because in Evangeline's perspective, it was always the same. Like, oh, like Apollo is the safe choice, but then why do I feel things for Jax? Literally, we were back to book 1. So in conclusion, I liked the Caraval series more, because I felt like you had this consistency, where Once Upon a Broken Heart didn't. Especially in book 3, the ending was okay. I mean, for some characters I thought it makes sense, but it was really underwhelming, because as I said, it's a series that's marketed as romantasy, but we didn't get any romance in the final book. Kind of odd. Honestly, what saved the Once Upon a Broken Heart series is Jax. He was the best character, and I know that this series gets a lot of love because of him. And I genuinely think that if Jax was one of the love interests, like permanent love interest in the Caraval series would have been more popular than the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. But that's just my opinion. I think both series are great. Essentially, it's the same genre, it's the same subgenre. You have some differences. As I said, Caraval is more like the circus night games trials, whereas Once Upon a Broken Heart is more about prophecies, yeah, and like a bit of vampire vibes as well, especially from book 2. That's when the vampire vibes kick in. Um, but yeah, essentially they're pretty much the same genre. The writing style is different, so you might, for example, enjoy Once Upon a Broken Heart, but that doesn't mean that you're going to enjoy Caraval, vice versa. So this concludes the video. I hope it was helpful and gave you a bit more insight on the two series. Feel free to leave in the comments which character is your favorite from the two series, and if you have read both of them, what series was your favorite. So let's talk about it in the comments, and I hope that you guys have a beautiful rest of the day or evening, depends on when you're watching, and see you soon. Bye.